Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere different. You're standing on the edge of a soft, dry slope, somewhere in ancient Nubia, modern-day southern Egypt, and northern Sudan. The air is warm, like it always is after the sun dips below the desert horizon. But there's a dry breeze brushing against your cheeks, stirring the fine sand around your feet. The stars are just starting to prick through the velvet sky overhead. Bright, quiet witnesses to a world that feels both familiar and deeply strange. Below you, clustered near a bend in the Nile, a village begins to hum with low voices, rattling pottery, and the occasional enthusiastic bleat of what sounds like a very stubborn sheep. You squint through the dusk, and yes, that's a woman holding a pot of paint. And is she dabbing it onto a sheep's flank? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it over there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk down toward the village, the sand sinking just a bit beneath each step, the scent of dry earth mingling with something floral, maybe crushed leaves. Someone's burning herbs nearby, maybe to keep insects away, or maybe just to please the ancestors. In Nubia, you're never quite sure which. As you draw closer, you start to see the sheep more clearly. Not your ordinary barnyard fluff. These sheep are marked, painted really in careful patterns. Some have stripes down their backs, others wear circles on their haunches, and a few strut around with bold red markings right on their faces, like they're ready for some very fashionable battle. It's almost ceremonial, though no one's wearing armor. A boy barefoot and no older than 12 walks by, holding a brush made of reeds and a little clay bowl filled with something thick and dark green. He doesn't say much, just nods, as if it's completely normal for you to be here. Then he whistles, and 2 painted sheep trot after him obediently. You're not sure what's more surprising, the colors or the coordination. Nubia, you realize quickly, isn't just ancient. It's specific. It's layered. It's a place of ritual, of purpose, of color, where you least expect it, especially when it comes to sheep. Historians still debate exactly why the practice of painting sheep was so widespread in Nubia and how it developed. Some argue it was merely utilitarian marking ownership or lineage, but others insist it had deeper roots, religious, magical, or even aesthetic. Tonight, you're not here to decide. You're here to witness. The village feels sleepy, but alive. Homes are low. and made of mud brick, shaped to keep the heat out and the warmth in. A woman squats outside her home, grinding something between stones. Dye pigment, you think, judging by the powdery red trail creeping across the rock's surface. Another sits nearby her lap, full of sheep wool, which she's combing through with a carved wooden fork. But it's the sheep themselves that capture your attention. They're everywhere, grazing, sleeping, getting painted like fluffy little canvases. One older man is even blowing gently on a sheep's side to dry the paint while muttering something under his breath. Maybe a blessing. Or maybe he's just annoyed that the sheep keeps trying to sit down mid-paint job. A little girl pulls your hand and points toward the river. You follow her. There's a narrow path lit with tiny flickers oil lamps perched in carved niches. Down by the banks, more villagers are gathered around each with a sheep, each with paint. It feels quiet and sacred, not frantic. No one's rushing. It's methodical, like braiding hair or preparing tea. It's clear this isn't just a chore. It's something else. And this isn't even market day. As you sit on a smooth rock by the riverbank, a herder next to you gestures to his flock. The colors tell their story, he murmurs. You don't just see them, you read them. You nod as if you understand. You mostly don't, but you will. Behind you, the village breathes in rhythm. Lamps flicker. The painted sheep graze. The Nile whispers past, patient and endless. This is Nubia. Welcome to the long painted night. You don't sleep that first night. Not because the village is loud, quite the opposite. It's the quiet that keeps you awake. The kind of quiet that feels old, practiced. A silence held in place by generations of footsteps, river songs, and sheep bleats soft enough to be lullabies. You wake, if you even truly slept, to the sound of bells, tiny, delicate bells tied to the necks of sheep, now gathering in a loose, colorful drift beyond the village. Morning has painted the sand a blushing gold, and the flock shimmers like a living mural, swirls of ochre daubs, of soft blue streaks of lime and crimson that seem impossibly vibrant against the neutral wool beneath. A herder waves you over, not surprised at all that you're just standing there gaping like a tourist from 1,000 years in the future. He gestures toward the flock with the proud air of someone introducing you to his extended family. You follow his lead as he moves among the animals, pointing out markings like their names in a ledger. That one see the double green bands. That means she's from my sister's line. And the spot on her ear. That's for last spring's good rains. You're not sure whether he's joking. You nod like you understand anyway. Sheep in this corner of ancient Nubia aren't just economic units. They're social currency. And painted patterns. That's the paperwork. Each family has its own style, its own palette. Some designs mark kinship lines. Others identify specific villages. A few might even honor old stories, births, or the memory of a lost child. There are rumors that a herder once painted his sheep to spell a love poem, one symbol at a time. Sheep, the original mixtape. Historians have confirmed the symbolic use of animals across ancient African cultures, though Nubia remains unusually rich in direct evidence. Rock carvings show horned creatures with elaborate patterns traced across their hides, often stylized, yes, but undeniably intentional. More interesting still are the burial sites where sheep bones have been discovered, with traces of mineral pigment still embedded in the wool, suggesting the decoration was more than surface level. Your guide stops before a particularly striking ram with bright crimson spirals down his back and a dark blue mark between his eyes. This one, he says, was born on the day the Nile swelled. A good omen. You instinctively reach out, but the ram stares at you with what can only be described as regal suspicion. He blinks. You retract your hand. He approves. As the morning warms, villagers begin to arrive, gathering their flocks and greeting each other with sleepy smiles and gossip that sounds like old songs. You notice the way they admire each other's sheep, not just in terms of size or health, but artistry. There's an old woman who critiques another family's paint choice with the subtlety of a fashion critic. Too much blue makes the wool look thin, she says, barely concealing a smirk. Some of the younger herders are less careful. You spot a few sheep with blotchy patterns. One even has a crooked heart shape across its side that wasn't intentional. The owner is red-faced with embarrassment trying to comb it out. It's like showing up to a wedding in mismatched sandals. One sheep stands apart, her wool patterned in faint spirals that look like wind trails. A few elders approach and murmur softly, heads bowed, not in scolding, but reverence. The sheep doesn't seem bothered. She just munches a weed growing out of a pottery shard. You ask your guide what that was about. He shrugs. That pattern is only used during mourning. Then, after a pause, but she's still with us, so it becomes a blessing. And just like that, you understand a little more. Painting sheep isn't about utility. It's about memory. It's how people here say things that are too large, or too old, or too sacred to speak aloud. One historian once referred to Nubian sheep painting as the world's quietest language. Others dismissed it as simple branding, a form of rustic bookkeeping. But that morning, standing among sunlit patterns and thoughtful glances, you're not convinced it's either. It's closer to poetry. As the flock begins to move toward the grazing fields, their colors blend into one another. What looked chaotic now seems choreographed. A slow ripple of living, breathing pigment. You walk with them, dust rising behind your steps, the sun easing overhead, and the sound of bells, soft, sure, and always in rhythm. The walk to the pastures is longer than you expect, but no one seems in a hurry. The flock spreads out like watercolor across the sand, the painted patterns shimmering as the sun rises higher. You trail behind a group of children, chasing after a particularly rowdy lamb, who apparently thinks it's fun to sprint ahead, stop suddenly, then bolt sideways like a fuzzy little prankster. The children don't mind. One of them is laughing so hard he drops his brush in the dirt and doesn't even try to retrieve it. By the time you reach the grazing lands, wide, semi-arid fields dotted with hardy shrubs and stubborn tufts of grass, the sheep have already begun to settle. You notice a subtle choreography. Older ewes tend to form the outer circle, while younger lambs gather in the center. The herders barely speak, just a few clicks of the tongue, a gentle whistle. The sheep understand. This, it seems, is where the painting really begins to matter. You spot a young herder unpacking a reed mat and a shallow bowl of grayish liquid. He dips a finger and tests it on the back of his hand, and then dabs a symbol, 2 curved lines, meeting in a point onto a lamb's shoulder. Another mark different color on its rear flank. You crouch beside him. Identification, you ask. He grins. Not just that. It tells me where she should graze when she was weaned, and if she eats too much. You blink. That's a lot of information for a squiggle. Turns out painting sheep wasn't only ceremonial, it was practical, in a time and place. Without paper records or ear tags, visual markings served as a memory system. Each herder developed their own shorthand symbols, passed down through generations. Some of it makes sense. Blue dots for female, green for fertile, a line across the back for lambed this year. But then there are stranger ones, zigzags for good-natured and X, with a swirl for don't trust her near the water. You raise your eyebrows. He shrugs. She gets ideas. Historians still argue whether these marks were part of a broader proto-writing system, or simply a visual dialect of livestock management. Some even suggest that Nubian sheep markings influenced later forms of African symbolic writing, but the evidence is as fragmentary as a lamb's attention span. You help a bit carefully, dabbing a dot with a leaf brush onto a particularly plump ram's hip. He doesn't budge, but gives you the side eye the entire time, like he knows you're new at this. The brush leaves a faint green mark. It'll fade in a week unless sealed with oil or resin. Some dyes, the herder explains, are just for show. Others are for life. Around midday, a shout goes up. A sheep has wandered too far and somehow ended up on the wrong side of a dry ravine. You jog over with the others, worried for the animal. But it's fine. It's just standing there confused. What's not fine is that it has the exact same marking as another nearby herd's sheep. Same stripes, same colors. That's a problem. 2 elders are called over. They examine the sheep closely, murmuring. One scoffs. The angles are wrong. That's our paint. The other retorts. So now you own triangles. You back away slowly. Eventually, it's resolved with surprising calm. A neutral party, a wiry man with a kind face and the posture of someone who's settled. 1,000. Such arguments declares that the sheep will spend one night with each village. If it tries to return to one in the morning, that's its rightful flock. Everyone agrees. The sheep, unaware of its diplomatic status, begins chewing on a beetleweed bush. Conflicts like these weren't uncommon. When painting became widespread, so did disputes over design ownership. Some paints were considered family property. Others were borrowed through marriage or trade. One particularly bitter story involved 2 rival clans painting their sheep with identical spirals, only to end up rebranding their entire flocks with completely new marks out of sheer spite. Imagine repainting 200 sheep because of a family feud. That's commitment. You wander to a small hill for a better view. From above, the flocks look like a moving mosaic, colors bleeding into each other, separating again like the tide. It's hypnotic, calming, a reminder that history sometimes is about the things that don't change fast, like sheep moving slowly across the same land, in the same way, under the same sky. A warm breeze stirs the grass, and for a moment, everything stops. Even the sheep seem to freeze listening. A bird calls in the distance. The Nile murmurs beyond a sand ridge. You sit cross-legged and breathe. You've been watching people paint sheep for hours, and somehow it feels like you've never seen anything more important. The heat has softened into something tolerable by the time you make your way back to the village, trailing a small group of herders who are carrying their tools, half-empty dye pots, and one very sleepy lamb tucked into a sling like a baby. The lamb blinks at you unimpressed. You're led to a shaded courtyard where the real artistry happens. not the kind involving brushes and sheep legs. That was just the beginning. This is where the pigments are made. It starts with dust. A woman in her 40s, stern face, practical hands, Grindin is a clump of something that looks like dried moss against a slab of basalt. She sprinkles in dried petals, charcoal, something you don't recognize that smells faintly like citrus and clay. She adds a splash of goat milk and grinds again, the mixture turning into a muddy, mesmerizing swirl. You lean in to watch, only to have her gently smack your hand away with a reed stick. "Too close," she mutters. "You'll curse the mixture." You nod respectfully and retreat 2 steps. Across from her, a young boy stirs a bowl of deep indigo. "Crushed lapis," someone whispers behind you. "Imported. Expensive. Reserved for special occasions. Festivals, funerals, and once a sheep that survived a lion attack. That sheep apparently got a lot of attention for the rest of its life. It also got a personal name, which was rare. Most sheep here go by patterns, not monikers. There's a real ceremony to this paint mixing. You begin to understand that it's not about painting sheep as a novelty. It's a practiced ritual handed down like recipes or lullabies. There's even a family that specializes in green hues, which they achieve using fermented pomegranate skins and bits of oxidized copper. Their sheep practically glow at dusk. You're handed a shallow pot. The woman, now watching you with narrowed eyes, nods toward the brush. It's a stiff little triangle made from bundled papyrus. You dip it in very carefully and smear a line down your finger. It's gritty warm and smells faintly metallic. You watch as she tests it on the back of her wrist. Then she nods. It's ready. You follow the group back into the village, where sheep are being led one at a time into a ceremonial space, a kind of open-air pen with carved wooden posts. It's not large, but the atmosphere is hushed, reverent. Families gather around the edges, whispering softly, not unlike what you'd expect at a naming ceremony. Your guide explains almost shyly that some families paint their sheep before major life events, a marriage, a birth, a burial. One ewe, he says, will be painted tonight to honor a grandmother who passed during the last flood. The woman's favorite colors, burnt orange and pale green, will be painted in circles around the ew's eyes. You blink, touched by the thought. The sheep just blinks back, chewing hay. The painting begins. Lines, dots, swirls. Each pattern is applied slowly, methodically. You hear no chanting, no singing, just the soft sounds of brush on wool and the occasional tisk when a hand slips or the dye drips too thin. There's a young girl working beside you, maybe 10 years old. She's quiet at first, but eventually whispers, "My father taught me to paint when I was 5. She shows you her brush wrapped in dyed string, worn smooth from years of use. He said it's like reading a dream, but backward. You don't fully understand what she means, but you pretend you do because it feels important." Historians still debate whether these ceremonies held legal meaning or were purely symbolic. Some suggest that a sheep painted in mourning colors could serve as a walking announcement, something between a public notice and a mobile shrine. Others believe the painted flocks simply created a shared language of belonging in a culture where memory mattered more than monuments. The little girl finishes her design a spiral within a square flanked by 4 dots. It means safe journey. She looks up at you and adds, "For the soul." You glance around. The stars have begun to return. So have the painted sheep, now flickering in torchlight, their designs glinting like ancient calligraphy. Some marks are already fading. Others will stain the wool for weeks. But the moment itself, the act of painting, feels more permanent than any dye could be. A final sheep is led into the pen larger than the others. An elder steps forward and begins to paint without hesitation. His strokes are fast, confident. No hesitation, no test swatches. A single stroke of deep violet across the back, a dot above the tail, a smear of a rust-colored clay behind the ear. He doesn't explain the pattern. He doesn't need to. You exhale deeply. The night has changed. Slower, heavier. The sheep, now painted, shuffle back to their pens. The villagers disperse. But you stay seated, your empty bowl in your lap, the smell of wet pigment still clinging to your hands. You've painted a sheep. It's ridiculous. And somehow it feels sacred. By morning, the courtyard has returned to its usual rhythm. Pots scrubbed clean. Sheep lazily napping under the shade of scrubby acacia trees, and villagers already prepping for the next rotation of chores. You, however, still have dried pigment under your fingernails and a strange sense of pride in your heart. Someone calls your name. Well, not your actual name, just something that sounds like a friendly nickname. It loosely translates to paint finger. You take it as a compliment. Today's lesson begins not with painting, but with pattern decoding. You're taken to the side of a stone house where a series of etchings have been carved into the wall. Sheep shapes, dozens of them, lined up like a parade. Each one is decorated differently, some with spirals, others with triangles, cross hatches, or dots arranged in sequences that seem to suggest movement or mood. A quiet man with sharp eyes and long fingers begins to explain. These are ancestral patterns, he says, tapping a spiral with the butt of a reed stylus. This one belonged to my great-grandmother's flock. No one uses it now, not since the drought. You ask why. He smiles sadly. Because her flock didn't return. This is your first real glimpse into how personal the markings can be. They aren't just visual aids or colorful identifiers, they're memory archives. And in Nubia, where written language was used mainly for kings and tombs, sheep became living manuscripts. He leads you to a U with one such ancestral mark, a jagged line through a circle. That pattern's over 200 years old, he says. We don't know what it meant anymore, but we still paint it. You ask if it bothers him not knowing. He shrugs. The knowing is in the doing. Historians still wrestle with this idea, whether painted symbols were part of a codified language, a kind of folk hieroglyph, or something more fluid. A few academics suggest the sheep patterns resemble Proto-Nubian scripts, potentially laying the groundwork for later writing systems. Others believe the designs were entirely oral in nature, meant to jog memory, not replace it. You're more inclined to believe the latter, because when a young boy paints a dot above a spiral and grins like he's told a joke only his grandmother understands, you realize this isn't about universal meaning. It's about shared context. The sheep are just the canvas. Later that afternoon, you're asked to help sort dye stones. It's strangely soothing. Piles of dried materials, crushed flowers, oxidized metals, powdered rootstock, all needing to be sifted by color grain, size, and intended purpose. The stones are warm from the sun, and your fingers turn pink and green and gold as you move them. While you work, an elder tells you the story of the sheep with too many stories. A legend, apparently. It goes like this. One day, a herder painted every pattern he knew onto a single ram, trying to impress a girl from the next village. The ram became so heavy with memory, it forgot which direction to graze and just spun in a circle for hours. The girl was not impressed, but the village started using that exact pattern combination to mark sheep known for getting lost. You laugh. The elder laughs too. There's truth in it, she says, but also humor. You can't carry every story. That's why we share them. And share they do. You're invited to a twilight gathering near the edge of the fields where elders and children sit around with drums, flutes, and painted flocks clustered behind them. It's not quite a performance, more like an open mic night for oral tradition. One by one, people rise and recount the meanings behind specific patterns, some poetic, some practical. One boy insists his sheep's red cheek dot makes her run faster. A woman explains how a certain swirl helped her remember where she left the medicine herbs during her last pregnancy. A man confesses he painted a heart onto a sheep to impress his now wife, but it washed off in the rain. She married him anyway, and you start to see it. These sheep are walking stories. They carry grief flirtation, weather reports, entire family sagas. Some patterns have died out. Others are deliberately revived, like retro hairstyles or forgotten lullabies. Toward the end, someone paints a single dot on a newborn lamb's ear and announces softly, "She is the start of something." You don't ask what that means. You just smile. And maybe you think that's how memory survives. Not by cataloging, but by repetition, by painting the same shape over and over until your hands remember what your mind cannot. The next morning, you're woken not by bells, but by laughter, low and rhythmic, like the kind that bubbles out of people before breakfast and before reason fully returns to the brain. You sit up, brush the sand from your sleeves, and follow the sound to the village square. What you find is a sheep spa. Okay, not officially, but that's exactly what it looks like. There's a row of shallow basins filled with water oil and what smells like rosemary and sun-warmed clay. Several sheep are standing in them, eyes half closed, clearly living their best lives. Two older women are working their way down the line, combing the wool with wooden picks and gently rubbing scented oil into the fleece. You're not dreaming. This is part of the preparation for market day. You see, in Nubia, appearances mattered, and while some communities might just walk their animals to the trading post and call it a day, here, well, they took livestock presentation to a whole new level. The painting wasn't just for memory or ceremony. It was also part advertisement, part prestige display. A well-groomed, well-painted sheep meant its owner had time resources, and most importantly, pride, not unlike brushing your teeth and ironing your clothes before a big job interview. If you also happened to be wearing bells and scented oils, you crouch next to one of the women and point at the mixture she's using. She nods approvingly, then lets you smell it. Cardamom crushed mint and some kind of animal fat. The oil keeps the wool supple, makes the paint last longer, and this is said in a whisper, helps ward off the evil eye. Or nose, perhaps. Historians have written about livestock grooming in ancient cultures before, especially in relation to sacrificial rituals. But Nubia may be one of the few regions where sheep were groomed for social status rather than slaughter. There are fragments of Nubian poetry translated on cracked stone tablets that describe a man's wealth by the smell of his sheep and the shape of their shade. You don't even know what shape means, but you're obsessed. After the oiling comes the perfuming. A thin incense-like smoke is wafted beneath each sheep using a fan made from palm leaves. One sheep sneezes, and the crowd erupts in laughter. The sheep looks deeply offended. You promise never to laugh at an oiled, perfumed sheep again. Your guide joins you, a bowl of dark purple paint in one hand. Final coat, he says, always darkest before the sun. You're confused until you realize that certain dyes deepen in hue when warmed by sunlight. This last coat, applied just before market, will set as the flock walks drying to a glossy sheen that glows under direct light. It's clever. You're witnessing ancient marketing strategy in real time. Some colors are reserved for special roles. A sheep marked with a double stripe of white and black may be part of a ceremonial offering or a bride's dowry escort. Others have faint cross-hatching that only shows up when viewed from certain angles, a kind of visual signature. One sheep has a complex swirl that your guide tells you only shows its true meaning at sunset. You don't know what that means either. You nod solemnly. Anyway, children are running about carrying small mirrors, checking the reflection of the paint on each animal. A tiny boy holds one up to a lamb, frowns, then gently adjusts a crooked ear, marking with his thumb. He doesn't speak. He just takes sheep aesthetics very seriously. There's a group of teenage girls standing nearby, examining a particularly showy ram. Its fleece has been fluffed with a comb and painted with alternating bands of gold and rust red. They giggle every time it takes a step. You overhear one say, "It walks like it knows it looks good." And honestly, it does. That evening, as the sun begins its descent, the freshly painted and perfumed sheep are paraded through the village. Not in a formal procession, nothing quite that theatrical, just a slow, proud walk to the outer fields where traders and visiting kin wait. Each animal catches the dying light in a different way. Colors shift. Patterns shimmer. You can smell rosemary and sun oil in the air mixed with dust and quiet pride. No one says much during the walk. It's a moment of calm, a shared knowing. Everyone here has contributed painting, grooming, storytelling, joking. It's collective effort made visible on the backs of animals. You trail behind watching footprints press into soft earth. Yours too. You wonder what mark would you wear if you were a sheep. Probably a crooked swirl and an ink smudge on the side. You smile. The market isn't so much a place as a rhythm. You feel it before you see it. A low hum of conversation, the distant bleating of restless sheep, the rhythmic thunk of pottery being stacked, unstacked, and stacked again. You crest a sandy hill, and there it is a temporary village, within a village woven together by rope tents, reed mats, and the sun glinting off 100 tiny mirrors hung for decoration, or good luck, or both. You follow the painted sheep as they step into the crowd, each one an ambassador in wool. They move with surprising grace, their patterns catching the light, drawing glances and low whistles of admiration. It's not just traders. Here there are cousins, cousins of cousins, travelers from upriver, musicians with kora-like instruments, and children weaving between legs like they've been trained for this moment their entire lives. Sheep are lined up beside woven baskets, clay jars, and trays of dried dates. Some are leashed. Others are just obedient. One wears a necklace of shells and seems to know it. A man next to you mutters, "That one's been shown in 4 villages. He's famous." You look closer. The sheep in question is frankly majestic. Its wool has been curled with wet reeds and dried in a sun-swirled shape, like a floral design. Its markings are intricate, crisscrossing patterns in 3 hues, and its hooves have been gently polished with palm oil. You're pretty sure it winks at you. Transactions begin quietly. No one yells prices. A trade might take 5 minutes, or it might take an hour. Bartering is a gentle negotiation here, not a battle. And the paint, it plays a role in every deal. That line on the leg means it's already birthed 2 healthy lambs, a man explains, pointing to a ewe. And the sahibat on the neck, that's a fertility marker painted during the last flood season. You nod, as if you understood that all along. The buyer squints. But is it real paint, or just for show? This question is more loaded than it sounds. In the Nubian sheep economy, authenticity matters. Some paint combinations imply certain traits: strength, endurance, high milk yield. But if someone fakes those patterns for a better price, that's a serious offense. You overhear one woman accuse a seller of false marks. Everyone goes quiet. The accused calmly leads the sheep through a small maze of stones. It passes. The accusation is dropped. Apparently, you can't fake confidence. Historians still debate how widespread paint fraud was in ancient livestock trading. Some say it was rare, too risky in tightly knit communities. Others suggest that's precisely why so many complex marking systems evolved to make forgery harder. Some paint even had faint scents mixed in bitter or sour herbs to prevent copying. You begin to realize you're not just at a sheep market. You're standing in a coin-driven economy of pigment and performance. There's a group of painted sheep near the edge of the market, surrounded by musicians. They're not for sale. Ceremonial herd, someone says. Blessed for the river. A woman steps forward and daubs a drop of indigo between the eyes of one ram, then whispers something into its ear. The ram stands perfectly still. You half expect it to answer her back. Next to the musicians, someone offers you a bowl of something sweet, thick, like honey, flavored with dates and ground seed. You accept it gratefully. Your fingers are still stained with yesterday's pigment, and the scent of painted wool is embedded in your sleeves. You feel part of this somehow. You spot your guide. Again, sitting under a palm-frond canopy with a young boy and 2 small lambs. He's teaching the child how to reapply a faded pattern using a stylus made from a hollowed reed. The second coat, he explains to you, isn't just for looks. It tells people you meant it. You smile. That feels true for more than just paint. The market fades into late afternoon. The sun lowers. Trades wind down. Some sheep are gone. Now new owners, new flocks. But their markings linger. You see a ram in the distance, wearing the pattern of a woman you met this morning. Her story now travels with that sheep, perhaps, to a village a day's walk away. And so it spreads. Stories by hoofprint. Memory through pigment. The painted sheep move homeward, bells jingling faintly in the evening breeze. Some have new marks, some are simply tired. One stops to sniff your robe like it remembers you. You pat its head. Still painted, you whisper. Still seen. Night returns like a blanket you didn't know you needed. The painted sheep have mostly wandered back to their pens or clustered near the village fire pits, lying in cozy heaps that look like spilled treasure chests of color. The day's excitement has melted into the soft hush of evening, a time for stories, for quiet repairs, and apparently for arguments about paint theft. It begins with a whisper. 2 herders, cousins, or maybe not speaking cousins, eye each other across the courtyard. One gestures toward a sheep. It's got a familiar spiral design in a rare yellow pigment that only one family in the village is supposed to use. The other shrugs, like he's just as surprised. Tensions rise. An elder intervenes, flanked by two quiet observers. They gather around the sheep in question, inspecting the paint under torchlight. One scratches at it with a twig. Another sniffs it. This is apparently standard procedure. You watch, amazed. There's no shouting, just thoughtful frowns and polite dismay. Eventually, it's agreed the pigment isn't stolen. It's simply similar. The paint was made using a different root base, producing a near match. But everyone can relax. The sheep isn't carrying forbidden marks. A few apologies are exchanged. A pot of fermented millet is passed around as a peace offering. Welcome to pasture politics. You learn that in Nubia, the social rules around sheep painting were as intricate as the patterns themselves. Families often kept paint recipes, secret passed down from mother to daughter, guarded like heirlooms. Some mixtures were even believed to be spiritually attuned to certain bloodlines. It wasn't about owning a color. It was about owning the right to mix it. Kind of like intellectual property law, but with goat fat and turmeric. Historians still wrestle with this idea. Was pigment protection a form of early trademark? Were disputes recorded somehow, or just memorized and whispered about across generations? There's no papyrus scroll explaining the etiquette of paint theft, but based on what you're seeing tonight, the customs were deeply internalized. You sit with a group of herders beneath a tree, the air rich with smoke and roasted grain. Someone's drawing a sheep in the sand with their fingertip. They add a spiral on the back, a double dash near the ear. Another herder frowns and erases one of the lines. That symbol belongs to the river clan, he says. The first nods, adjusts, then redraws. This, you realize, is how it's taught not with scrolls, but with repetition, correction, and firelight storytelling. The designs live in the fingers, not the ink. One man tells you of a time when 2 entire villages nearly went to war over a duplicated earmark. They settled it with a paint duel. He chuckles. Each side painted the other's sheep better. Winner got naming rights for the season. You ask if that really happened. He shrugs. Probably. Maybe not. But we still laugh about it. Near the edge of the courtyard, a small flock of sheep huddles together. You recognize a few of them. Their paint has started to crack and fade from the day's heat, forming abstract blurs that look like watercolor, bleeding on wool. Yet they still carry meaning. Someone points out a splotch you would have missed entirely. That, she says, was once a sun mark. It means born early, faded, but you can still tell. The idea sticks with you that even fading marks leave shadows. Memory doesn't disappear. It just softens. One of the elders brings out a clay tablet with etched sheep designs. Practice templates, you're told. Children trace them with charcoal sticks as part of their training. You're invited to try. Your attempt at a spiral looks more like a snail having a bad day, but you receive an approving grunt nonetheless. You sit with your back against a warm wall, listening to the low thrum of village life winding down. The moon is climbing. A cool breeze cuts across the square. Painted sheep breathe slowly beside their pens, safe in the knowledge that tomorrow their patterns will speak for them again. You wonder briefly if any of this will be remembered thousands of years from now. Probably not in the way it truly happened. Maybe a carving survives. Maybe a sheep bone, faint pigment still clinging to its wool. A historian guesses at meaning. A theory is formed. But here now it's all alive. The sheep, the paint, the jokes, the jealousy over dye recipes, the shared smiles under starlight. And you, accidental visitor, clumsy brush holder, paint thief witness, are part of it too. By the next morning, you've developed a genuine appreciation for how much balance it takes to carry a paint pot on your head while managing a dozen sheep. You personally cannot do it. But the barefoot teenager walking ahead of you, she's practically gliding across the rocky trail, a shallow ceramic bowl perched perfectly on her crown, like it's weightless. Every now and then, she reaches up to steady it, not because it's in danger of falling, but because the goats are misbehaving again. Goats, you've learned, are not painted. They're too chaotic. They nibble the brushes, try to drink the paint, and once, according to legend, ate the elder's sandal and blamed it on a sheep. You're on the move again this time, toward the river's edge, where the younger herders graze the flocks and refresh their pigments. The air smells wet and green, reeds whisper. Dragonflies dance like they've got somewhere very important to be. You squint at the morning sun bouncing off the Nile, and suddenly, there it is, a slow ripple along the water's edge. A crocodile. Well, not exactly in the water, more like slinking past it. Big old, probably uninterested in anything that isn't already dead. Still, everyone watches it. There's a pause, a mental note, a quiet adjustment of the flock's direction. Just in case, one of the herders clicks his tongue and mutters something under his breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe a threat. The crocodile, unimpressed, disappears behind a boulder. Business resumes. The younger herders begin setting up shop. On the riverside, dye stones brushes and makeshift drying racks made of driftwood and rope. A sheep is led gently onto a flat rock and held still while a new pattern is applied. This one, a set of horizontal lines down each side, denotes a recent weaning. You're told it's important to update the marks regularly, or people will get the wrong idea. You assist a girl who's mixing a new batch of pigment-crushed ash seed pods for the base goat milk for binding, and a few drops of date syrup for shine. She grins when you hesitate at the syrup. "Sweet sheep are lucky sheep," she says. Historians still puzzle over the use of such ingredients. Was it purely decorative? Did it make the sheep easier to identify in twilight? Or did these additions carry symbolic weight blessings against disease, or indicators of desirable traits? The answer, it seems, is yes to all of the above. Nearby, someone spills a bowl of ochre. It splatters across a rock and into the dirt. There's a collective sigh. That color had taken 3 days to produce. A few sheep wander over, curious. One sniffs. The stain sneezes violently and walks away like it's offended. Fair. The painting continues, but there's a relaxed vibe here. Not ceremonial, just maintenance. These are the touch-ups, the refreshes. You watch a boy carefully re-outline a faded swirl, his brush steady, despite the lamb twitching every few seconds. He hums while he works. The lamb eventually calms. At one point, someone begins decorating their brush instead of the sheep. They tie a bit of blue string to the handle, tuck a flower behind their ear, and announce, "If the sheep must look good, so must the artist." A philosophy you can respect. A teenage herder offers you a turn. You hesitate, then accept. He hands you a smaller brush, probably wise, and points to a sheep with a smudge that used to be a triangle. You try your best. The triangle comes out a little haunted, but the sheep doesn't seem to mind. As your awkward artwork dries, the sun climbs higher, and the air thickens. Some of the paint pots are set in the shallows of the river, where the cool water keeps them from drying out too quickly. The herders take turns fanning the sheep to keep the insects off. Someone pulls out a flute and starts playing a simple tune, just a few notes back and forth, like the river itself is humming. The crocodile returns. Only its eyes and snout are visible this time, floating lazily in the shallows. It watches. No one panics. This is a known crocodile. Someone calls it grandfather. Another throws a clump of mint leaves in its direction, not to feed, but as a kind of offering. You ask, only half-jokingly, if they've ever painted a crocodile. The older girl beside you chuckles. Once. It didn't go well. You leave it at that. The day drifts on, like the river itself. You lose track of time. You touch, paint, smell, mint fan, sheep, avoid stepping in dung, and wave politely at a crocodile. It all feels like part of the same rhythm. Before heading back, a small ceremony is held, not a formal one, just a quiet moment by the water. The herders dip their brushes in the river, hold them aloft for a breath, and then gently set them down. A gesture of gratitude, or maybe just habit. Either way, it feels right. You walk back with the sun behind you, the painted sheep ahead, and the quiet thrill of knowing that somewhere in that flock is a slightly crooked triangle that you helped paint. You return to the village, feeling oddly triumphant. Your triangle may have been lopsided, your brush grip awkward, but it dried, clean, stayed put, and more importantly, wasn't immediately repainted by someone with higher standards. You suspect the sheep was just forgiving. Back near the pens, the mood is shifting. A dusty wind rolls in from the west, bringing with it a sky the color of old parchment and the taste of grit on your tongue. The elders mutter about an early seasonal change, and the herders start gathering their flocks closer together. This is when you first hear the term painted camouflage. It sounds like an oxymoron. Why would painted sheep need camouflage? A wiry man with laugh lines and serious eyes leads you to a cluster of sheep tucked against a sandstone outcrop. They're painted, yes, but unlike the elaborate spirals and vivid color blocks you've seen, these sheep wear muted tones: clay red, pale green, ochre smudged into stripes that mirror the scrubland around them. You see them, he asks. You squint. You don't. Then, slowly, they resolve from the background, blending in so naturally, it's unsettling. Like ghosts with hooves. These markings aren't for trade, he says. They're for survival. You sit on a smooth rock, as he explains. In harsher years, during droughts, dust storms, or when predators drew closer to the villages, some Nubian communities developed a form of naturalistic sheep painting. The goal wasn't beauty or lineage. It was concealment, blurring the outlines, breaking the shape of a sheep into something less desirable to a predator. Lions, jackals, even desperate humans from rival groups. You picture a lion eyeing the herd, seeing shapes and stripes instead of silhouettes. It sounds strange, but then again, nature's full of camouflage. Why not add human creativity to the mix? Historians remain divided. Some call this painted concealment wishful thinking, arguing that sheep paint or no paint are notoriously bad at hiding. Others cite oral records and rock carvings showing livestock painted to match terrain visual strategies passed down like survival blueprints. Whether or not it worked, it was tried. And in desperate times, trying counted. The elder gestures toward one sheep. its coat daubed with charcoal and ochre in rough zigzags. This one lost 2 lambs to drought last season. We painted her like the riverbank. She didn't lose the 3rd. You don't ask whether that's because of the paint or luck. In Nubia, those might be the same thing. The dust storm grows closer. You're ushered indoors, not quite a house, but a wide shelter made of palm thatch and mud brick. The sheep are brought into enclosures padded with bundles of reeds and old fleece. The air is thick with heat and the scent of old wool and oil. Inside, the herders begin their next task, preserving the patterns. You learn that in seasons like this, when fresh paint can't be applied every few days, sheep receive resin, coats a thin glaze of plant-based lacquer mixed with ash and tree sap. It seals. The paint keeps it from cracking and helps repel insects. Your guide hands you a cloth and a bowl of the sticky mixture. You dab gently along the painted back of a sheep. Yours, you think the one with your triangle. The resin smells like pine and smoke and hard work. It glistens when it catches the light. Beside you, a woman works in silence, brushing resin over a sheep marked with something like tally marks across its legs. She explains that those lines record the seasons this sheep has survived. 3 floods, 1 sickness, 2 journeys. You ask what happens when they run out of space. She doesn't hesitate. Then the next lamb carries the mark. The storm begins to growl outside. Wind rakes across the walls. The village retreats into itself, voices lowering to a hush. Children huddle with their families, some tracing sheep patterns on each other's arms, with their fingers, no pigment required. You sit near the door, watching flecks of red dust sweep past. The painted sheep shuffle, huddle tighter, breathe calmly. They are not panicking. They've done this before. Someone brings you a warm bowl of fermented grain, mash sour and smoky. You sip and think about the sheep blending into the stone, the girl whispering blessings through paint, the lamb with tally marks on its legs. The storm will pass like they always do. And when it does, the patterns will still be there. Faded, maybe, cracked in places, but still legible, still part of the landscape, still telling stories. The storm passes, the way all desert storms do suddenly, without fanfare. One moment, it howls against the walls like a furious god, and the next there's nothing but the soft tick-tick of sand settling on clay roofs. When you step outside, the world looks powdered in rust. Everything has a reddish tint, like someone's been careless with paprika across the horizon. The sheep emerge two blinking and yawning as if they'd taken a collective nap. Some of them are less powdered than others. The ones who huddled near walls or beneath the reed shelters wear little more than a dusting. Others are positively orange, and yet their paint still shows. That's when the elder calls you over. She's standing next to a pair of sheep whose markings are barely visible beneath the dust. With a damp cloth, she gently wipes away the outer layer and reveals a surprise. Beneath the dust is a second set of marks, older, faded, and distinct from the ones painted most recently. You blink. Why 2 sets? She grins. Because some stories need to be layered. In Nubian herding traditions, it turns out not all patterns are meant to be erased. Some are painted over, but deliberately, so like writing in palimpsest. A spiral might be added on top of a faded stripe, preserving the old meaning while adding new context. A sheep might carry 5 generations of marks beneath its current coat, like pages in a woolly diary. You kneel beside the ewe, watching as she gently scrapes back a line of dust to show a pattern so faint it looks like a memory. It is. This one, the elder says, was painted by my mother. She was marked for the festival of first rains. I've never repainted that part. I just added around it. Historians call this shadow marking a phenomenon mostly preserved in oral histories and a few wool fragments found in tombs. Some argue it was purely symbolic, a gesture of honoring the past. Others believe the accumulation of markings told a literal family story. Either way, it's quiet continuity in action. Later, you're led to what the village calls the archive, a small pen off to the side of the main grazing area, home to the oldest sheep in the flock. These aren't painted with bright colors anymore. Their wool is gray, their steps slow, but each carries a kind of reverence. Their patterns are more subtle, small, deliberate lines placed sparingly and rarely updated. One has a single red dot near its left ear that no one has dared paint over in years. These, your guide says, are the keepers. It's not a metaphor. The oldest sheep are sometimes used to settle disputes, not just because of their age, but because of their markings. If 2 families argue over a boundary, a marriage promise, or even the date of a past event, the elders will study the keeper's paint, tracing back what was recorded when. A sheep's leg might remember which year the river broke its banks. A tail might recall which season a famine ended. And sometimes, if no resolution is found, the sheep themselves decide. You witness one such event that afternoon. A long-standing disagreement between 2 families overgrazing rites reaches a soft crescendo. No shouting, just quiet firmness, and a shared sheep between them, standing rather indifferently nearby. The solution: each family's flock is released on either side of a marked line. The keeper sheep is let loose. Whichever side she chooses to stand with will be honored. She walks directly into the shade of a tree. Neutral ground. Everyone laughs. Even the sheep look smug. That evening, you're invited to help with a rare task, brushing out an old pattern. It's a deliberate act, not erasing, but retiring the symbol. A lamb who carried a fertility mark has since been deemed barren, and so her pattern must be changed to reflect her new role in the flock, not as a mother, but as an aunt, a caretaker. You watch as a young herder gently rubs clay into the painted area, dulling it, then coats it with milk and ash. Once dry, he applies a new mark 2 dots over a curved line. Caretaker, he explains. Still respected, just different now. The sheep blinks slowly. You get the sense she's entirely on board. You sit back, watching the firelight flicker over fleece. The older sheep huddle close their marks, barely visible, but still present. Younger ones, newly painted, dart about like restless toddlers at bedtime. And you think there's something powerful about not wiping everything clean, about letting stories stack, about letting one layer soften beneath another, like brush strokes on canvas or old handwriting beneath newer thoughts. Some marks are sharp, others are shadows, and sometimes the oldest stories are the ones no one dares paint over. By now you know the rhythm of the village well enough to predict the order of things, the rising sun, the gentle chorus of bells, the early morning bleating, and the low murmur of herders discussing who needs repainting and which lamb wandered off again. You wake before the bells today, not from noise, but from quiet. There's a kind of hush in the air, anticipatory, respectful, maybe even a little sacred. You follow the sounds of soft voices to the central courtyard, where an unusual sight greets you. A group of elders gathered in a circle around a single immaculately painted ewe. Her coat is dazzling white, freshly washed, and marked with a unique set of swirling blue lines that arc from her shoulders to her flanks. They're intricate, not decorative, but deliberate, like sentences written in a language just out of reach. You lean closer, then realize they are sentences. She carries a family's story, someone whispers. Their entire line. The idea stops you cold. This is no ordinary sheep. She's what your guide quietly calls a text bearer, an animal, painted not just to show ownership or memory, but to preserve genealogy. A walking, bleating archive. This U's markings include birth years, flood cycles, marriage events, even the tragic death of an older sibling, all painted using an inherited pattern system known only to that family line. Sheep like this aren't rare in Nubia, but they are revered. They function as memory vessels, especially in times when no one wrote anything down. And even now, centuries later, that reverence hasn't faded. You sit beside the circle, listening as each family member recounts the meaning of a different mark on the ewe's wool. One woman points to a red crescent near the hind leg. That's my aunt. She crossed the desert to marry. We call that the sun-following mark. A younger man taps a green dot on the flank, and that's for the son who never returned from the flood. We leave it unconnected. You realize the marks are more than symbols. They're syntax, visual grammar, passed down through hands and habits. And everyone here reads them fluently. Historians sometimes scoff at the idea that animals could serve as record keepers. But then again, most of those historians never sat on baked earth, watching 3 generations of people decode a sheep, like it's a photo album written in loops and lines. The family's matriarch steps forward to add a new mark, a soft gray arc across the spine. It represents a grandchild born the week before. The mark is fresh. The child is sleeping nearby. A new story begins. You're handed a brush, a test maybe, a moment. You hesitate. This isn't your story to add to. But instead, the matriarch points to a faded blue line along the ew's side. Trace it, she says. Make it clear again. Your hand is steady. You dip the brush into cool pigment and slowly trace the worn line, careful not to press too hard. The color blooms gently across the wool, the memory made sharp again. It's small, but it matters. Later that day, you walk with a younger herder out to the river bend, where another sheep, the daughter of the one you painted, is grazing. She has only 2 markings so far, a tiny red dot behind the ear and a green triangle on her back. It's enough, the herder says. She'll grow into the rest. You sit on the bank, watching her twitch and stomp at flies, completely unaware that she's a story in progress. Sometimes, he adds, the sheep remember better than we do. You think about that. You think about the centuries of families who couldn't write, but still passed on marriages, losses, migrations, hopes, all carried on 4 legs and painted in the language of swirls, dots, and colors. Sometimes, if 2 clans argued about lineage or land, a text bearing sheep would be brought to the elders, and examined like legal evidence. One mark might prove a marriage. Another might recall a death during the last great sickness. If all parties agreed on the interpretation, the dispute was settled. The wool was the witness. Of course, historians debate this. Some claim it was more symbolic than binding. But even skeptics admit when memory must travel on foot across time, it needs something to hold on to. You glance back toward the ewe in the courtyard. She's lying down now, eyes closed, tail flicking contentedly. Her story for now is at rest, and you wonder how many stories were lost when sheep like her faded away. How many still walk quietly, waiting to be read. There's a sense of anticipation in the air today, but it isn't about painting. Not directly, at least. Today is Council Day, a gathering of village elders, storytellers, herders, and anyone else with a voice and something to say. You're told this happens only once or twice each season. The topic: which sheep marks will be passed on, which retired, and which controversially banned altogether. You raise an eyebrow. Banned. Some patterns. Your guide explains as you walk toward the gathering. Don't mean what they used to. In the center of the village square, mats are laid out in a wide ring. A fire smolders low, just enough to keep the bugs away. Around it, people sit cross-legged, some with sheep by their sides, others with folded arms and serious brows. A few hold small boards made of clay sketch pads of sorts, etched with proposed symbols. At the heart of today's debate, a zigzag mark traditionally used to signal high fertility. But a younger generation of herders claims the mark's meaning has shifted. It's been misread, one woman argues. It's confused with fevered now. It causes offense. Another elder sighs. It was always meant to honor strong lambs. But yes, I've heard the confusion. What follows is an hour of discussion, drawing laughter, and the occasional playful jab. You only want to ban it because your sheep never earned it. Eventually, the group reaches a compromise. The zigzag won't be banned, but its use will be archived, reserved for ceremonial sheep only, and accompanied by a dot to clarify its intent. It's paint politics, but it's also about language identity and the push-pull between tradition and change. You ask your guide if this kind of debate happens often. He shrugs. More than you'd think. Less than we need. Historians have discovered traces of similar councils in Nubian rock art and pottery. Fragments. Groups gathered not to settle disputes of territory, but of meaning. Which symbols deserved to endure? Which ones belonged to which families? Which could be adapted as the world shifted? One particularly obscure account describes a great forgetting, a period of drought and displacement during which many paint patterns were lost, misused, or merged. In the aftermath, a council of shepherds supposedly created an entirely new visual code, an alphabet of sheep built from memory and necessity. You wonder how many meanings have changed, been softened, or forgotten entirely. Later, as the council disperses, you notice an older woman sitting quietly near a pen, brushing the side of a sheep with careful strokes. Not painting, but removing paint. A spiral mark is being slowly, lovingly washed away. You ask why. She looks up. This mark belonged to my brother. He passed last season. No one in our line uses it anymore. She gently scrapes at a faded crescent on the sheep's leg. I will retire it here. You watch in silence. The removal feels no less sacred than the application. She finishes, then wipes her hands clean, leaving behind only bare wool and the ghost of a design that once meant something very specific to someone very dear. That evening, another ceremony begins. This time, it's the blessing of the first mark, a rite for lambs receiving their very first paint. Families gather with their youngest sheep and youngest children. Brushes are passed from grandparent to grandchild, and a single simple mark is applied. A dot, a line, a tiny crosshatch. It's not elaborate. It doesn't have to be. The first mark is for presence. Someone whispers beside you. Not meaning. Not yet. You take a seat at the edge of the square, watching the scene unfold like a soft theater. Children giggle. Lambs twitch. Parents try to act solemn and fail. One kid paints a happy face instead of a circle. No one corrects him. The lamb looks amused. Somewhere in the middle of all this, you realize you've stopped thinking of the sheep as just animals. They are carriers now of pride, of protest, of memory, of messy debates about fertility symbols. They are alive in more ways than one. And you think about how rarely we question the things we mark, or why we mark them. Names, dates, signatures, tattoos, memorials, and here, lines on wool. Each says, I was here. I meant something. And in this village, surrounded by quiet rituals and stubborn traditions, that is enough. You wake to singing, not loud, not even melodic in the usual sense, just a steady chant drifting over the rooftops, like the scent of baking grain. It rises and falls in the morning air, warm and low and full of syllables you don't recognize, but somehow understand. You follow the sound across the village and find the source, a line of herders walking alongside their sheep toward the northern pastures, their voices weaving through the dust like thread. They're walking the memory trail your guide explains. It's an old route, taken only once each season. You fall in beside them. The sheep move slowly, as if they know the path is significant. Some are older. Others are lambs wearing fresh paint that still smells faintly of resin. They've all been marked with a special stripe, a diagonal line down the spine that only appears during this journey. The memory trail, you learn, is a living map, an oral and visual path through the land that recalls events tied to specific places. Every bend in the trail corresponds to a story. Every tree past a death or a birth. Every smooth stone a turning point. At the first bend, a herder points to a twisted acacia tree and murmurs, "That's where we found her." The ewe with no marks, no flock. We gave her the mark of the wanderer. It's still used today. At the base of a rocky ledge, another stops and kneels. "Here's where my grandfather painted his last sheep. During the drought, he used only dust and tears. There's no sadness in his voice, only steadiness. You feel yourself walking not through space, but through time. Each step forward is a step deeper into layers of lived history. And the sheep carry it all wool, stained with pigment that points backward as much as it does forward. One herder carries a basket of dye stones as an offering to the trail, his family's way of saying thank you. He scatters them as he walks tiny flecks of color left behind like breadcrumbs. You wonder if anyone will ever find them again, or if they're meant to fade. Maybe both. Historians have long debated the idea of memory trails in ancient Nubian culture. Some refer to them as spiritual pilgrimages, others as practical herding paths layered with symbolic stories. But none of the surviving records capture the feeling of walking it the way each painted sheep seems to move with quiet purpose, as though they too remember. You reach a ridge overlooking the river, and the herd halts. This is the turning point, both geographically and emotionally. Here, a story is always told. It's never the same one twice. Today, an elder steps forward and begins to speak, not loudly, but with clarity. She recounts a time many generations ago when a sickness swept the valley. Flocks were lost, families scattered. Only the sheep remembered who belonged to whom, led their people back, guided them across the river, one by one. It might not be true, or maybe it is. No one questions it. When she finishes, she walks to a lamb and draws a new mark, a sunburst near its shoulder. For new light, she says simply. You watch others follow her lead. Not everyone paints. Some just touch the wool, whisper, a name lay a finger on a fading mark, as if to recharge it with meaning. Some weep, some laugh. You do neither. You just stand very still, the wind tugging at your sleeves, the sun pressing gently on your back. The walk home is silent, not somber, just full, like everyone is carrying more than they arrived with. As you return to the village, the sheep file back into their pens, the new paint still wet, the old paint flaking like ancient bark. The air smells of earth and sweat and memory. You help close a gate. Your guide pats your shoulder. Not bad, he says. You walked it like you knew it. Maybe in some strange way you did. That night, the fires burn longer than usual. Not for warmth, but for reflection. Some families gather their sheep and sit quietly, retelling the stories of the trail, not for performance, but for anchoring, for remembering. One woman traces a mark on her sheep's back and says, "This is where I began." She doesn't mean the paint. The next day dawns slow, golden, and gentle, one of those mornings where the wind forgets to blow, and even the birds seem to stretch before singing. You rise earlier than usual, not because someone calls you, but because you want to see the painted sheep one last time before the rhythm changes. This is your final morning in the village, and everyone seems to know it. No one says goodbye outright. That's not the Nubian way. Instead, they hand you small things, a piece of dried indigo root, a reed brush tied with string, a thumb-smudged stone, once used to grind yellow pigment. You don't ask if they expect you to remember what each item means. You already do. The flock is quieter today. There's no ceremony scheduled, no council, no dispute to resolve or mark to revise. The sheep graze in soft, sleepy clusters, their patterns faded slightly from the sun and the storm and time itself. And yet they still tell stories. You recognize one, your sheep. The triangle you painted, now dulled and cracked, still visible beneath a layer of dust. It looks like it belongs there now. Part of the flock, part of the language. The girl who first taught you to paint walks beside you, holding a lamb marked with a swirl and 2 dots. A mark for return, she says, matter-of-factly. In case you come back. You smile, though your throat tightens a bit. Your guide, now more like a friend, takes you on one last walk through the village, pointing to places you've passed a dozen times, but never really seen. The dye pits behind the grain store, the ink rock, where pigment is dried in the midday heat, the tree where sheep are sometimes painted upside down for good luck. You'd ask how, but some mysteries are better left untouched. Then, without prompting, he begins to paint. Not on a sheep this time, but on the wall near the main pen, where dozens of marks have been applied over the years. A public history, a graffiti of stories. He adds a single curve, a half-moon shape, and looks at you. That's yours. You hesitate. What does it mean? He shrugs. You decide. And so, with your brush, your reed brush, your awkward grip, your stained fingers, you add one small mark beneath the half-moon, a dot. It doesn't say much, but it says enough. Later, as the heat begins to rise, you help move a group of older sheep to a shaded enclosure. They move slowly now, but with the surety of animals who have seen everything and remember most of it. One of them carries a mark from 3 generations ago, a paint pattern so faded it looks more like a shadow. You ask your guide if anyone will ever repaint it. He shakes his head. No, we let that one fade. Not all stories are meant to last forever. You sit beside the pen, your back to the sun-warmed wall, the painted sheep breathing gently nearby. You listen to the quiet, not empty, but full. The kind of quiet that holds years and echoes and paint-stained hands. The wind picks up. A few sheep stir. A brush rolls across the dirt. And you realize this story was never about sheep. It was always about memory. The day draws to a close now. The sun dips behind the hills of Nubia, casting long, soft shadows over the painted backs of resting sheep. The village begins to settle. Pots are stacked brushes, rinsed and left to dry, and children retreat indoors, still whispering about the lamb with the funny ears. You sit at the edge of the pen, watching the flock shift, and sigh in their sleep. The marks on their wool fade gently in the dimming light. No longer distinct lines and symbols, but softened echoes, stories blurred by dusk. The air cools. Someone nearby hums a lullaby, low and ancient, and without urgency. You can't understand the words, but the tune settles into your chest like something you've always known. You breathe slower now. The ground beneath you is warm from the day's sun. The sheep breathe in time with the wind. The village quiets to a heartbeat. In your hand, you still hold the reed brush. You're not sure when you'll use it again, but that doesn't matter. Tonight, you've seen how memory lives in wool, in pigment, in soft footsteps and shared rituals. You've walked the trail. You've painted a mark. You've listened. And now you rest. So close your eyes. Let your breath slow. And know that somewhere under stars and beside a river that never forgets painted sheep are dreaming too.